Welcome to the Producer Review Podcast, the premier podcast for aspiring artists and producers. We discuss production, mixing, recording, and review your track submissions. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Guys, thanks for stopping by the Producer Review Podcast. This is the first episode. My name is Derek. I go by the name D-Ruck. That's kind of my engineering name. I received that when I was running DB Studios and Ruckus Entertainment, a little label in Orlando, Florida. But I go by the name Knock Rio as a producer, partially because I live here in Rio de Janeiro now. I've kind of emigrated here for about a year and 7 months at this point, a year and 7 months. But I am a producer, I'm an engineer, I'm a writer, not only music, but also e-guides and e-books. I'm kind of delving into that a little bit. I just finished one called The $5 Guide to Changing Your Life. I'm a sometimes rapper, but I'm probably too old for that now. Listen, I'll jump on a track still, just for fun, but it's not a career move for me at this point in time. Rapping is where I actually started. When I was a teenager in high school, we used to go at lunchtime into the bathroom, and I would rap, and my homeboy Disco Dan, skinny white dude, had the best beatbox, so he would beatbox, and I would rap. And so that's kind of where I got started, and from that experience, it was good because I learned how to write. I had to write quickly because I had to write at night. I had to memorize the verses, and then I would have to come spit it the next day, and there'd be crowds there. Like we would get crowds. We'd have girls there, even in the boys' bathroom. Like the whole bathroom would be full, and we would just be riding out in there. So that's kind of like where I started at. I was always a little bit musical. I could play little things on the keyboard. If I heard a song, I could kind of tinker with the notes and just find out, what the melody was on it. So that's kind of where I started as a kid. But then professionally, I started recording in my production career about 25 years ago, right in about 93 or so, when I moved to Orlando, Florida. I was always interested kind of in production when I was living up in New York, and I used to go by the studio on East Avenue in Rochester, and I would see these cars outside, and I'd be like, yo, like Benzes and stuff like you never see. And I didn't know at the time, but that was like Devontae Swing from Jodeci was doing a lot of work out of there. I ended up finding out that Jodeci was spending a lot of time in Rochester because Dalvin actually had a baby by one of the girls that we knew. Like, she went to a church where my dad went to. So that's how I found out like Jodeci is actually there, but I never met them. I never felt like, I can go in the studio and spend any time there. I was like, I don't have money to go in the studio like that. I don't have money to pay like $100 an hour or whatever they were charging. So I never actually went into a studio until I moved to Orlando in like 1993, 94. I visited a studio for the first time. The studio's name was Audio Playground. It was in Winter Park, Florida, just outside of Orlando. And the owner, Joseph, he was really great, man. This guy was a sound designer. He was an engineer. He actually had a museum in his studio as well, like a full real museum. Like when you go there, he had synths from all over the nation, all over the world, all these vintage synths, and they worked. That's the crazy thing. And if they didn't work when he bought it, he would fix it. Like you'd go in there and he'd have like this synth taken apart, and he'd be soldering stuff, and he'd be like this dude knew what was going on. And the great thing was, like, if you were doing some production in the studio and you wanted that particular sound for your album, you could tell him like, hey, this is the sound that I heard. And he would go and get that synth and plug it in so that you could actually use it and use the actual sound from like some record you heard from the 1960s. Like, he was that good. Like, it was just really amazing. So, I learned a lot from him. He had a real nice facility too. It had, I think, a Trident board, and it maybe was like 64 channels in the A room. And then he had a synth room too that was like $25 an hour. So I did a lot of work in there. There were maybe 5 or 6 synth keyboards there. There was an Allen and Heath mix board in there. There was, of course, the ADAT machine, because we had to record on ADAT tapes. There was nothing like recording on a computer at that time. There was MIDI, so we would dump everything in MIDI in the computer, but we didn't record vocals or anything or any sounds on the computer itself. This is kind of before that time. So eventually I also bought a Boss DR5 drum machine. And that drum machine was really dope because you could play the drums, of course, the drum sounds, but it also had instruments like keys and guitars, and it had a chord button. So you hit the chord button, and then each of the little buttons that you hit would actually play a chord. So you would learn how to put the chords together. And it had I think like a 4 or 8 track sequencer in it. So you could put all the sounds in separately. And it had MIDI, so when I go into the studio, all you have to do is jack in the MIDI and we could track everything out. So I would take my whack beats to the studio and put them on the ADATs or whatever, and sing my little songs to it, or rap my little songs, or have somebody work on something. It was really cool. We were learning, you know. It was different back then because the internet was just kind of starting out, had a real slow dial-up AOL connection that I was using. So it wasn't like you're going to get information from Google or something back then. So I had to subscribe to actual magazines or go buy them at a bookstore. I would get Mix magazine and I would get Recording magazine so that I could learn all about recording and engineering, since I didn't have the money to buy the equipment that I was seeing. Like, it was so expensive to buy hardware. I would see it in the studio, and Joseph had like everything in there, like all the dope equipment he had in there, like mad dope equipment he had in there. So like, it was top of the line. So I definitely couldn't afford all of that stuff. So I had access to it. I could go see it, but I had to read at home, read these articles and kind of find out what other producers were doing, and other mix engineers were doing on their projects to kind of learn. And then when I go into the studio, I could apply it. And so it took me some time to build some equipment. I bought a 8-track Tascam cassette recorder at one point. That was like 94, 95. And that was really cool because it was like a cassette tape, but it had 4 tracks that were stereo. So if you used each track separately as mono, you got 8 tracks on it. So I hooked that up in my living room. I ran a cable out my front door to this other room that I had, this storage room, which I put some padding in there that was like the worst. I went to like Home Depot and got like some wall insulation or something really crazy and put it in there or whatever. But that was my booth, and I had a microphone. I forget what kind of microphone I had in there, but it's probably something cheap. And I put an ad in the newspaper, and I received my first call for a session. So I ran a session, and that dude is still friends of mine. That's David. He was going by the rap name Legacy. I don't know if he still raps or whatever. It's been so long. Yeah, he was like the first person that ever contacted me, and he came through. I think he came through with a friend too, but he did a session with me or whatever, and I made a little money from the session. It probably was terrible. Like, I didn't know nothing about mixing and all that junk. So, you know, but we did it on this little 8-track cassette recorder. I was learning, and I was just eager to learn about it. And that's the only, thing I can tell you guys that are new as far as production. Sometimes it takes time to learn it. You're not going to be dope from the beginning. You have a lot of tools now. I'm going to tell you though, you have a lot of tools in your computers now that make you sound great. That you can sound great, but even with all of that, you still need to hone down on the skills a little bit. Learn why things work the way they work. Learn how to do things in a way that make your production sound good. You got to spend time with the education on it, just like everything else in life. But, overall, it's fun learning the ins and outs of the studio, recording and mixing, I was doing all of that, but I was producing and writing at the same time too, because it never crossed my mind that production, writing, being the engineer, that all of that was separate stuff. I just was used to doing a lot of it already, as far as the writing and the rapping and performing and all of that kind of stuff, because I had a singing group in New York with some friends of mine. We did like Boys to Men covers and some other stuff. And we actually did a couple of weddings and things like that for some friends of ours. So I was doing that already. I was kind of in the realm of producing things and producing even little shows and stuff like that already. I just didn't really occur to me that these are all different jobs that people do. So in 1996, I lost my job as a stock trader, and I opened this little studio with some equipment that we had. We actually had a friend that invested about $3,000 in some equipment for us. I remember that we bought an N364 keyboard, and we got a computer and some other stuff as well. I don't remember what kind of mic that we used, but I rented an office and built a booth inside it for the vocalist. And another friend of mine, he actually bought me a CD burner, and that CD burner was like $250. I remember like he went to Best Buy or something, or Circuit City somewhere, and got me a CD burner because I needed to have something to give my clients a copy of their work. And they were so expensive. It was like a 2 to 4 times burner or something too. So it was like really like one of the first generation ones that you could buy. You could tell I'm old. I was around when burning a CD at Audio Playground. He used to charge like $50 to burn a CD. So it was really expensive to burn a CD. So to actually have that in your computer was really amazing, but it cost you a grip. Like, it wasn't like now you could probably get it for like $20 or something. But back then it was like $250 for this thing. So I was really grateful that my friend, it's a guy that I worked with too. He's just a friend. He believed in what I was doing, and he bought it for me. So it's really cool. But I started doing sessions, and I was charging like maybe $10 an hour, because I knew by that time, like, okay, I'm not a real studio like that, like a real large studio like Audio Playground or whatever, and I need to just kind of go slow here. So I had a few sessions, and we had some fun sessions there, some great memories. The building was cool. The building was a nice building in Winter Park, had security, all of that. So it's really cool. But with the situation of borrowing money from my friend to actually get equipment, I learned a lot from that. It was like my first introduction into the crazy business of music and also entrepreneurship at the same time. So I had like 3 other partners in myself. So there were 4 of us that were going to pay off this $3,000 debt. So I was making all of my monthly payments. No one else made theirs. I think we had one person made 2 payments. The other 2 people made 0. So I guess everybody forgot that they sat in my living room and agreed to make these payments. And then, so we kind of got into it with my friend who was supposed to be receiving the payments. And all I can say is I paid my payments. I don't know what happened to everybody else, but other things kind of happened too. I really wasn't ready with the studio. I ended up closing that. I moved away to Mississippi because my ex-wife and my son and my daughter were living out there. So I went there for about a year. So that kind of ended, but it taught me a lot. The lesson that I learned from that was basically have paperwork, even if they're your friends. Have something on paper, something that you can refer back to and say, hey, this is the agreement that we made. This is your signature on the agreement. So you got to do what's in the agreement, or we got to dissolve the business in some sort of way, so that you know what everybody's supposed to be doing. Also, if you can, do it on your own, man. Work your butt off, own your studio outright. Don't borrow money from friends to do it. Just do it on your own. That's eventually what I learned to do from that situation. I learned right then and there, like, I'm not going to have my equipment taken away again by anybody. Unless I want to get rid of it, that's the way it's going to happen. I'm not going to have my equipment taken away. So in 1999, when I returned to Orlando from Mississippi, I ended up landing a job at another brokerage firm again. It was Discover Brokerage. And at Discover Brokerage, they actually, you guys know Discover Card. You probably heard of Discover Card. So they actually owned a brokerage firm. And we eventually got bought by Morgan Stanley Dean Witter within a couple of years. And that came to an end. 2001 was the dot-com bubble or whatever. That ended, and that whole job ended for me. But I was in management, so they actually end up cutting me a check. Now, the government took half of that check because they paid me in a lump sum, but it still was a decent amount. So I had already been buying equipment while I was working there because I was making some decent money. I had a 4-bedroom house that I built. The 4th bedroom was my studio. I had bought an MPC already, the MPC 2000 XL. I bought some Tannoy monitors. I bought a Rode NT1 microphone. and the cabling and all that stuff. People forget that. Like, you can get the equipment, but you got to have the cabling and all that stuff that kind of goes with it at the same time. And I bought a Trinity Rack sound module. So I was doing productions in my fourth bedroom at that time as well. But when I got laid off, they paid me out this severance, and I was able to dump a little bit more money in. All in all, I spent about $10,000 to $12,000 on equipment. And when I opened my studio, I think in that first year, 2001, in 8 months, I got all of my money back. I had in the studio, I added, upgraded to Cakewalk Sonar software. I got a MIDI keyboard. I got a Kurzweil rack sound module. I got a tube compressor. I built another booth so that the rappers could go in and or at least the singers or whatever could go in and the sound would be good and it's not bleeding into the headphone, bleeding into the mic and all that. So it was really kind of cool. I hung the mic from the ceiling or whatever. I was thinking I was really doing it big. So, but it was a cool place. I had a few clients to begin with. Then there was this rapper that came through. His name was Jay Reddy. And he said that he was in this rap group. And this rap group turned out to be called Fed Up. And they had a label called Fed Up Records. And that was I think 5 or 6 rappers in the group itself. But then outside of the group, they had all of these peripheral guys who would come through and do verses and stuff like that. And so all of them were learning about the studio too. So it was like a Wu-Tang situation because these guys could all come together and do a project, but everybody was working on solo projects too. So the studio's booming after a while, right? So this is really was a cool situation. Through that, I met AJ. And AJ was the best musician that I had been around up to that point. I remember one day we were in the studio and we remade a D'Angelo song. And he actually used my keyboard or his I forget what keyboard we used, but he actually used the keyboard to play all the parts. And I had never really seen somebody remake a whole track like that. A commercial track. He remade the whole thing within maybe a couple of hours of work on the board, and he recorded the whole song even that same day, and it turned into a really, really nice song. I was really impressed. So I ended up giving him keys to my studio so that he could work. I was like, yo, just come, hang out here, work, because I needed to learn from him. So I'm like, I can't lose this guy, so I got to have him around. He's a drummer as well. He was a drummer before I think he was even a keyboardist, and he plays in churches and things like that. That was his background, and now he's actually a producer for Young Jeezy and CTE. He's been on a couple of mixtapes. He's on Jeezy's album. He's got placements with that. He's worked with Def Jam. He's worked with other artists around the world. And he's doing his thing. He's married. He's got his kids. He's got a beautiful life and things now. And, he's doing his production. So hopefully one day I'll get him to do a little interview with us here on the show. I think I can get AJ to do that for me. So the studio was becoming a success, man. Over 5 years' time, I met a lot of great people in my studio, this little 400 square foot studio. But man, I met some people. I met this lady named Shadia. She was a Grammy nominee, actually. And that was the first time I recognized or I learned that you don't have to be some major artist signed to a major label to get a Grammy nomination. You could just be a regular person, and if you're putting out good music and someone nominates you, you're a Grammy nominee. And Shadia was tough, man. She was a middle-aged black woman. You wouldn't look at her in the grocery store and be like, okay, that's a music producer, but man, she produced her own music. She would do it in her drum machines or whatever, whatever she had, and she would bring it into the studio or whatever, and then she would record her songs. She wrote all her own songs or whatever, and that junk was dope. So, you would just never look at her and be like, yo, that's like an artist. So I learned that you can't look at a person and know what they do. You would never know that she was this great an artist. I met another guy who was he was a Grammy-winning producer. I would say he owned the group of producers. He started a business and there were 6 producers. I think his brother was one of the producers. I forget what his name was. But these producers, at least a couple of them, had worked on an album for Gladys Knight like that year before, or a couple years before. And that year before, she won a Grammy for that album. So they actually got Grammys. And so then he was like shopping deals for like 20 million with labels and stuff like that. Like he's doing it big. But his demo CD was crazy, like incredible. Like when I play his demo, I put that CD in, yo, my jaw was just on the floor because everything he had was fire. Like everything was fire. Yeah, look, this man, I'm listening to this one song. I'm like, yo, I know that voice from some. Who is that? Yo, this is a young Justin Timberlake. And Justin is singing this song, but the song is not for Justin. The song is for Michael Jackson. This is what I'm talking. This is the level this dude was on. And I just remember him sitting in the studio telling me, he was like, yo, listen, labels hate to see me coming. He says, when I come, they got to cut a check. So, yo, my man had to fire. Like, so I met this guy. There was another guy that, I'm not going to bore you with all these stories today, but I'll just tell you a couple of them. But there was another guy that I had originally seen on the Making the Band, like one of the first Making the Bands. He was a black guy. He lived in Germany, and he had this house in Germany with a dope studio in there, and they went over there to Germany to record. And so I remember him because he had this beard, and he was a little strange. I was like, yeah, this dude's a little strange because he got like this beard, but he had these two braids in his beard. So I was like, yo, like I never forgot the guy. So fast forward some years, and one day I got home from the studio, maybe 6:30 at night, and my phone rings, and it's this dude that, God bless him, but just, you don't ever know if he's gonna show up. I'm not gonna drive like 20 minutes back to the studio or whatever and have him not show up, man. I'm trying to eat, trying to chill out with the family. So he's like, no, man, you gotta come to the studio. You gotta come to the studio. So I'm like, I'm not going down there. I know he on some bull. So I was like, whatever. I even gonna study that. So I was like, man, I'm not coming down there. He's like, man, you gotta come. I was like, no. So he calls AJ, who has keys to my studio. And so AJ's like, okay, whatever, because AJ's always down to go to the studio. So I learned from that too. You got to be down to go to the studio when it's time, when the call comes. So AJ like says, yo, I don't got no car, so you got to come pick me up. So now AJ lives on Mercy Drive in Orlando. If you know West Orlando, you know Mercy Drive. That got a reputation out there. You know, he's living in this apartment complex. It's not the nicest place in the world. It's definitely very hood. And so he hears a beep outside. He look out the window. He said, it's a limousine outside. He's like, yo, who's out here in a limousine? Like, this is crazy. So, of course, AJ goes down there. If you know AJ's personality, he's going down there. So, so he goes and they go to the studio. He goes with this guy. It turns out the guy in the limousine was this dude from Making the Band. And so I ended up meeting him. He came back to the studio the next day, and I did end up meeting him. And he came and just chopped it up with us. He just sat there and he was like, yo. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, I seen this dude's studio in Germany. I seen his house. His junk was fly. Like, I'm like, I would love to live where he would live. But he's like, nah, man, I didn't even know people had little studios like this. He's like, yo, this is cool. I was like, wow, like, you really think this is great? He's like, no, man, this is really, really cool. Like, I'd work out of here. And I was like, and that just showed me right there, like, you got to have a humble mentality. You got to kind of remember, number one, where you come from, no matter how big you get, to be willing to work with people that are even below the level that you're at. You know, be happy and have gratitude and be that you've been so blessed. So I learned from that, you know. So that's just a couple other stories. I met another cat who won a Grammy as a dance DJ. I won't go into that story here because that's a whole episode right there, just in the lessons that we learned from that situation too. So I'll tell you that story one day. But in 2006, I closed the studio. You know, I was doing some work in the mortgage industry. I had an opportunity with that. I was traveling to like 5 cities a week within the state. I think I was in Orlando Monday. Tuesday, I would go to like Miami. Wednesday, I'd be in like maybe Tampa. Then I'd be in Jacksonville. And I'd go and come back the same day. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I was doing this like week after week. And then I was going to like Texas, California, just building my team. I had people in Georgia. that was under my team in my mortgage business. So I didn't have time. I realized like, I ain't been in the studio in like 6 months. Like I'm just doing other things. So, and I had kind of peaked too, because I was like, creating music on a daily basis can be tough. I just realized that I wasn't in love with it right at that moment anymore. I just was feeling like I don't listen to the radio. I never hardly ever listen to the radio, because all I hear is the different tracks. I'm in engineering, so my job is to hear the different tracks, right? Snare, kick, hi-hat. That's all I hear when I listen to the radio. I can't listen to the song as a whole piece anymore. So I kind of like walked away from a while. I was like, I'm gonna just close the studio. I put all the equipment in my house. It just kind of sat in my house. I do stuff here and there, but I just wasn't in love with it no more. And that kind of was an important thing to learn too, because sometimes you got to walk away from things when it ain't popping like that for you. Sometimes it's better not to force it. Sometimes you need that time away, and it's good as producers to kind of get that time away. That's something that I learned. So, in a nutshell, that's like some of my experience. I'll tell you about some other things as we go along and as we build this podcast. I'm really excited about it. I'm just trying to get people excited about the business. I want you to know that you can do it. I don't have like placements, and I ain't working with this big artist or whatever. I have people that I worked in the studio, like Kevin Costner. He was signed to Atlantic. He's done songs with P. Diddy and Fabulous and different people. He wrote the hook for an R. Kelly song, "In the trap all day, play all night. This is the life of a go-getter." He wrote that hook. I'm sorry for the terrible singing, but he wrote that hook. If you look at like his discography, he's wrote a lot of hooks and things. But his mom had a school, like a kid's school, in my building, and so that's how I met him. Like, so I met him at a young age or whatever, and he used to come in the studio and we did tracks and stuff like that. One day I'll play you some of that stuff. I got songs from that I found from way back in the days, and things nobody's really even heard. So like just little things like that. Like, so there are people around me that have had a lot of success. I'm not really looking to be some big time producer. My whole goal is to enjoy the production at this point. I have other ways to make money. As far as like, I teach English here in Brazil. And that's just something I love to do too, because it's a way to help the people here. Because they need to be able to speak English. There's so many English tourists, and we got money to spend, but they can't get to the money if you can't talk to them. So, I'm teaching them, and I'm finding that I really like to do that. I'm writing, like I said, I'm writing my ebooks. I've got time to do that. Just finding ways, man. I'm doing a production thing now. Maybe this podcast will do some things for me as well. So I'm really in a good space, just energy wise. So my goal with this platform is just to share and help aspiring artists and producers attain their goals. We'll do some interviews with people so that you can hear what's going on, how they're making money, different things that they did before. Maybe they got placements, or maybe they don't have any placements, but they're making it through their life. Just how they're getting it, on a daily basis. Everybody's not going to make it big. That's just the nature of the beast. But I know a lot of people who are making it medium size, and they're making a living, and they're getting money from the game and paying their bills. So, maybe I can open your mind a little bit to how they were doing it. That's the kind of the purpose of this podcast. So on the podcast, I will be taking submissions for track reviews. So get your best work prepared, and you can send the MP3 to me. I will set up a box to receive the tracks. Maybe I'll just give you this email. It's ilimusicgroupbeats@gmail.com. So it's ilimusicgroupbeats@gmail.com. And I'll keep this on the website too. My website is www.ilimusicgroup.epizy.com. I'm also on YouTube, and I'm also on Twitter. I also have ILI Music Group on Instagram as well, so you can find me there. Just connect with me, and we'll see what we can do. I don't know everything. I'm going to tell you that right now. I've been around a while, but I don't know everything. And I'm hoping to learn from this podcast too. That's why I want to interview other producers and get more ideas. So I'll provide what I can to help encourage you. This is definitely not about putting people down and being negative. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth, though. Like, if you're just not ready, you're just not ready. And but we're gonna give you, pointers, places where you can progress, things that you can work on, because it takes time. This is a game about growth. We're artists, man. We have to learn our craft. This is not something you wake up in the morning and you just do it. This is about learning a craft. So I'm going to tell you the truth of what I think about it when I hear your work. But my goal is not to offend anybody or be negative. My goal is always to be positive. Okay. I think the game needs more people who have been around a while and who've kind of walked in the shoes of a new producer or artist, just to kind of guide the new artists that are coming out. I think it's important. But anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Once again, my music can be found at ILI Music Group on YouTube and also on Instagram. Do me a favor, and if you go to my YouTube, definitely subscribe there, because I got like 1 subscriber, and take a listen to some of the tracks there as well. If you have questions, definitely feel free to send me an email with questions. I'll try to address it on the podcast, and get your submissions ready. I'm going to figure out how that whole thing is going to work, but as I meet all of you, I'll definitely will be following your social medias as well, as much as possible. I probably won't get to every single thing you put on there, but if I follow you, you can almost guarantee that I've been to your page and listened to your music. So I'm not one of those people that are just collecting followers. I definitely, anytime somebody comes on and follows me or I follow them back, I go to their page and I listen to some music over there just to see what they have and see what they got going on. So okay, I'm out at this point in time. It's your boy D-Ruck, aka Knock Rio, with ILI Music Group and the Producer Review Podcast. Peace.